But the one name always associated with Siegel's death is the one name he would have least expected. That of his best friend, Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky was one of the most mysterious of all mob figures.
Little Meyer, quite tough, but not really a violent man.
For some, he was the Jewish mastermind behind the Mafia, pulling the strings from the shadows.
He was a financial genius of organized crime. He was also a killer, part of the New York Mafia, and very powerful and very successful.
But for others, he was little more than a middle manager for the mob. His sinister reputation, the product of media hype and hysteria.
The cold, hard evidence suggests that he wasn't quite the business brains that everybody thought he was, or that he thought he was himself.
Mob mastermind, or victim of his own legend. We unravel the enigma of Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky arrived in America in 1911 as an 8-year-old boy. He and his family were Jewish immigrants fleeing the brutal anti-Semitic pogroms of their native Russia.
He was scarred by what he saw as a small child. I think Meyer was rather focused on anti-Semitism and his belief that he is not going to lay down the way the Jews in Russia or Poland did, and the way he even felt his father did. And a lot of what Meyer felt being Jewish was not putting up with abuse and fighting back.
His family soon settled in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, New York's impoverished Jewish ghetto.
He grew up in a pretty tough district in New York. And whatever your size was, you had to be tough. You had to be able to take a beating and give a beating. And so he was small.
Just 5 feet 4 inches, Meyer Lansky quickly learned to use his fists and was soon in trouble with the law. It was at this time he'd first met another young Jewish hoodlum called Bugsy Siegel. The meeting happened when Siegel became involved in a street brawl.
Siegel had these charismatic good looks, and he got involved in a fight, a street fight, and he picked up a gun. And he was so transfixed with the fury of the fight and his anger that he raised the gun and was about to shoot somebody. And they could hear the police coming from all directions. It was only when Meyer sort of physically restrained him and pushed him away that he was able to save him. He said that was the beginning of their friendship, and that, of course, was actually the nature of their relationship.
Lansky was the brains, Siegel was the brawn. Together, the two young men formed the Jewish Bugs and Meyer gang.
You sort of get this sense that, oh, organized crime is Italian. But early in the century, the Jewish rackets were very, very powerful.
The gang stood up to the Italian and Irish toughs that came into their neighborhood to beat up Jews. They also engaged in more lucrative activities.
They were involved in what we'll call small-time criminal activities. Hijacking, loan sharking, gambling.
Lansky and Siegel's big break came in 1920 with the introduction of prohibition, the ban on the consumption of alcohol, a ban which spawned a lucrative illegal trade for mobsters of all ethnic groups.
It was prohibition that turned all of these low-level street predatory criminals into business executives, because they had to figure out how to manufacture or import, distribute, sell, run real organizations.
Bugs and Meyer gang was soon carving a niche for itself in New York's brutal gang wars. And it was at this time that Lansky made what would be the second key alliance of his life, with Italian mobster Charles Lucky Luciano, a man whose respect Lansky first earned when they were teenagers, and Luciano tried to rob him.
Famously, Luciano tried to shake him down, and Meyer told him, in no uncertain terms, in very colorful language, where he could get off. You think that because I'm Jewish, I'm just going to fork over money. That's not going to happen today, buddy.
It was the start of one of the most important friendships in the history of organized crime, and of a groundbreaking Sicilian-Jewish alliance.
Luciano really didn't like the old-time Sicilian bosses, the notion that you only stick with your own. A lot of the newer, younger Italians, they didn't really care about the cultural precedent for setting up a gang. It had nothing to do with Sicily. They wanted to make money, and guys like Meyer, who were Jewish, wanted to make money.
With Lansky at his side, Luciano was soon shooting his way to the top of the New York underworld. By the summer of 1931, just one man stood between Luciano and total control: Salvatore Maranzano, a classic old-style Sicilian mob boss. Luciano turned to Lansky for help.
One of the stereotypes of the Jewish rackets is the Jewish guys handled the money and the Italian guys were the tough guys. Not true. Interestingly enough, when Luciano took over the Italian rackets, it was the Jewish muscle that played a big role.
The idea was that if you use Jewish gunmen, we get very ethnic now, if you use Jewish gunmen, the Italian criminals wouldn't be so suspicious because they wouldn't look like Italian hitmen or Sicilian hitmen.
At Luciano's bidding, Lansky organized a gang of Jewish assassins to visit Maranzano's offices on Park Avenue, posing as tax inspectors from the Inland Revenue Service.
One of the guys whose name was Red Levine, who was known for being an Orthodox Jew who would not kill on the Sabbath. But Maranzano was so bigoted that he felt if some Jewish bean counter IRS guys came to his office, they couldn't do him any harm. Well, not only did they do him harm, they killed him.
With Maranzano dead, Luciano became the king of New York and set about establishing the structures of the modern Mafia. Meyer Lansky now sat at the right hand of the most powerful mobster in America. But he knew there would always be limits on his power.
Lansky could never be a leader for one reason. He could never be a member because he wasn't of Italian or Sicilian extract. He was a Jew and he knew his place. He was highly respected as somebody who had the ear of Luciano, who could talk to Luciano, and he was a great entrepreneur in criminal endeavors. But he was never a kingmaker or in a position of authority.
From now on, Lansky's role would be that of a chief executive in his various criminal enterprises. Powerful, but answerable ultimately to Sicilian bosses. By now, he'd married and quickly had 3 children, the oldest of whom, Buddy, suffered from cerebral palsy. Otherwise, life was good. He left the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side behind and took an apartment in the exclusive Majestic building, overlooking Central Park on New York's Upper West Side. With the abolition of prohibition in 1933, he branched out into a new business, one that would dominate the rest of his life.
Meyer Lansky was brilliant mathematically, and his real interest was gambling because he had a knack for it.
Lansky was good with numbers. And the whole idea of gambling is you got to be quick with numbers, you got to know the odds.
He could tell you if it came to craps, well, the proportion for the table was 4.5, and if it was blackjack, it was 5.2.
Gambling was illegal, but widely tolerated, and Lansky was soon running casinos in New York, Florida, and a number of other states. Paradoxically, his casinos made money because they were honest.
The tables would not be fixed because he knew exactly how to take his profit without cheating anybody.
You don't have to be dishonest to win. You have to have volume. As long as you keep gambling, you'll lose.
By the end of the 1930s, Lansky's casinos had made him a wealthy man. But the little Jewish immigrant from the Lower East Side craved something more than wealth.
Right through Lansky's life, there is this wish to be respectable. And right through Lansky's life, there is this feeling that he is not a criminal, that he's a citizen like any other.
There is no doubt that the American people need an adequate merchant marine.
How did Joe Kennedy make his money? What was the foundation of the Kennedy family fortune? Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger, and he was able to launder his fortune and use it to pay his son's way to become president of the United States. Meyer Lansky literally compared himself to Joe Kennedy and felt he was no more immoral than that man had been.
He actually had a snobbish streak. This was somebody who studied history. This is somebody, when his friends were out carousing at night, would hire tutors.
Lansky sent his own second son, Paul, to study at the military academy, West Point.
He would jot down if he saw a vocabulary word that he was interested in. You can see in his handwriting, he would write about it in a book. I remember one of the things he wrote was, determine how to pronounce Thucydides.
The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 and America's entry into the Second World War provided Lansky with an extraordinary and unexpected opportunity to prove his patriotism and win the respectability he craved. In February 1942, a large troop carrier called the Normandy caught fire and capsized in New York Harbor.
The death of a queen. Now the $60 million luxury liner lies on her side, mortally stricken.
The Navy suspected sabotage. Many of the men who worked on the docks were Italian, a nation America was now at war with. When the Navy attempted to investigate, they found the waterfront an impenetrable, closed world.
The longshoremen by nature are not the kind of guys who take well to men in uniform, government uniform, coming onto the docks and saying, I'd like you to snitch. So Roosevelt is distraught by this. Pearl Harbor has just happened. The Navy is explaining to him, Mr. President, we don't control the docks. And Roosevelt is, what do you mean we don't control the docks? We're the US government. Well, Mr. President, you were governor of New York. Do you remember who ran the docks? Ah, okay.
At that time, the docks in New York were controlled by the mob.
The FBI and the war intelligence authorities suddenly realized the only way they were going to find out about what was going on the waterfront in New York was to actually come to terms with the so-called underworld, figures like Lucky Luciano. The trouble was, Luciano was in jail.
Luciano had been imprisoned in 1936 on charges of organizing prostitution. He was looking at a sentence of 30 to 50 years. The Navy needed a go-between. Enter Meyer Lansky, a Jew who already had impeccable anti-Nazi credentials. In the 1930s, German-American Bund. With the muscle to
by Meyer's boys. Meyer and Ben Siegel, and Meyer actually personally went to some of these rallies. They would go and bust them up. They would hit them over the head with bats, and they would really terrorize these Bund members.
When the Navy approached him in 1942 to help them on the docks, for Luciano to be moved to a more comfortable jail, closer to New York, and acted as a mediator in talks between the Navy and the Sicilian.
Can Luciano be moved? And then you see, because there was an official inquiry into this after the war, you see the actual document saying, move Luciano, Mr. Meyer Lansky is going to come up and visit him. Do not request Mr. Lansky's passport. Do not take Mr. Lansky's fingerprints.
What then resulted was a deal where Luciano could meet with his men in prison, where he hadn't been able to do that before. And yes, he gave the order to cooperate with the Navy, but he also was allowed to conduct business.
It was an extraordinary deal, and it yielded almost immediate results. In June 1942, 8 Nazi spies were arrested following a tip-off from mob-controlled fishermen, an event later trumpeted by the FBI in this publicity film, although the Mafia's role in capturing the spies was not mentioned. The following year provided the mob with an even more dramatic opportunity to lend assistance to the war effort. The invasion of Sicily, home country of the Mafia.
Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano bring Sicilian assets, contacts in New York, to naval intelligence and help design the maps, determine what the tides were, what good invasion locations were, beach terrain, and where Nazi strongholds were.
As American troops poured ashore in Sicily, the mob assistance proved invaluable. But the Navy knew it was playing a dangerous game.
The only thing worse than Operation Underworld, as it was called, failing, what if it succeeds? You're now in business with the mob.
Sicily was conquered in just 6 weeks. But this was not a story that the US government wanted made public. The mob's wartime collaboration was hushed up. Charlie Luciano was released from prison, but immediately deported to Italy. As for Lansky, he found that in the eyes of the government, he remained a hoodlum. His patriotism had failed to win him respectability. And if he really wanted to leave the streets behind, there was another millstone hanging around his neck. Bugsy Siegel.
Siegel stayed on killing people even after Meyer kind of slid out of this, what they used to call the Bugs and Meyer mob. Bugsy Siegel was a wacko. He was a crazy guy, and he did a lot of the... I never saw any indication that Lansky himself ever killed anybody. Siegel, on the other hand, he enjoyed it, and he killed a lot of people. Now, how many, I don't know. Could have been 5, could have been 20.
Siegel had by now moved to California, where his film star looks helped gain him entree to the Hollywood set. But Siegel's dreams were focused elsewhere. A few hours' drive inland, a dusty desert stopover called Las Vegas.
There were these rundown gambling operations in this desert city, Las Vegas, that already existed there. What Siegel realized was these dusty, smoky, rundown places had potential to be something bigger.
The great advantage of Las Vegas was that it was in Nevada, the one state in the Union where gambling was legal. Siegel set about building his own luxury hotel casino, the Flamingo, the first in Las Vegas, with money borrowed from Lansky and other East Coast mobsters. The project quickly ran into trouble.
He never respected budgets. He thought that everything was limitless. And what starts as $1 million ends up becoming, you know what, it's not $1 million, I need 3. You know what, it's not 3, I need 6.
The situation was complicated by the influence of Siegel's girlfriend, glamorous former dancer and mob courier, Virginia Hill.
No.
Her abrasive personality would later be displayed before a Senate commission on organized crime.
I never got money from any of those fellas. None of those fellas. None of these that I've been reading about, and none that I knew. They never gave me anything. But Bugsy Siegel was not the sort of man to listen to criticism of either himself or his girlfriend.
He was a very arrogant guy who would just basically tell him to go screw, you know, and he wasn't going to deal with these. He left it to Lansky to deal with these guys back in the East Coast.
Meyer pleaded with Ben Siegel to get things under control at the Flamingo, to start being more respectful of investors, to stop running around Hollywood going to parties. But you don't tell a 41-year-old man that you're not going to go trick-or-treating if you misbehave.
Mob backers ran out. Just a few hours after Siegel's death, the Flamingo Hotel received a couple of visitors.
2 men, Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum, walked into the Flamingo and said, we're in charge now. And somebody said, well, this is Ben Siegel's place. And they said, Ben is dead.
Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum were both business partners of Meyer Lansky's. It is inconceivable Lansky had been unaware of the fate that awaited his oldest friend. 40 years later, after Lansky's death, Lansky's second wife, Teddy, was asked about the murder.
I think he felt badly for the family, and they were buddies from the time they were youngsters.
There were reports that he was involved in the death.
I don't believe that. Circumstances sometimes make you think, but he would never directly have anything to do with anything like that.
Directly.
That's right.
Lansky may not have ordered Siegel's death, but he benefited. For all that he craved respectability, this was the life he'd chosen.
I suppose we could say there's a hypocrisy here. In all my research into Lansky, I never discovered him being personally responsible, personally fingering, personally instructing the death of anyone. But he made his money and he worked in an environment where murder was the ultimate sanction and where those who failed to stick by the code paid in that way.
The image of Lansky as a dangerous mobster was about to become forever established in the public consciousness. In 1950, the US Congress set up the Kefauver Commission, its first ever probe into organized crime.
You must have in your mind some things you've done that you can speak of to your credit as an American citizen. If so, what are they?
Paid my tax.
The commission focused primarily on the easy target of gambling, with the result that Lansky emerged as a far more important figure in organized crime than he was. Lansky was furious.
In one of the breaks in the hearings, Meyer said to Kefauver, "Senator, I don't know what you have against gambling. You gamble." And Kefauver snapped, "That's true. I do like gambling. I just don't want you people controlling it. You people." And one of the things that Meyer wrote in private notes is that gambling will become the biggest business in America once they run the Jewish and Italian boys. You people, out of it.
In fact, Senator Kefauver gambled on horses, which was perfectly legal. But for Lansky, it was another example of the hypocrisy of the establishment. The elite always looked upon gambling as an evil, Lansky wrote. Only when they used it as a pleasure or for the purpose of personal gain was it legitimate and not sinful.
Played to so many stereotypes. It was so damning to Meyer Lansky's reputation. He never recovered from it.
In the aftermath of the type Lansky ran in New York, Florida, and other states.
Let this be a warning to all racketeers and gangsters that they of their ilk will not be tolerated in San Francisco.
For Lansky, his dream of respectability seemed further off than ever. But as one door closed, another opened. Cuba in the 1950s was Las Vegas by the sea.
Cuba was better. Havana was better than Las Vegas. First of all, it was closer to New York. It was close to Florida. They could bring these people on airplanes, you know, quickly, and lots of them. Bring the entertainers in. Have an open city with every kind of vice you could imagine, with girls and pornography and cockfights and whatever guys like. Havana was the best of the best.
Lansky was invited to Cuba in 1953 by Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista to help run the country's casinos.
When Lansky and some of his friends arrived, they were welcomed because they would run straight games. And then from Lansky's point of view, how marvelous to come to a country where they are not hypocritically denounced, but their skills are recognized.
Lansky helped turn Havana into America's playground, where the elite could enjoy all the vices denied them in the newly moralistic atmosphere back home. Among those who visited was future President John F. Kennedy.
Did Meyer know John Kennedy from Havana days, from trips there?
Yes.
What was he looking for in Havana? Gambling, women?
You said the second one.
Oh, a lot of people look for that in Havana.
Oh, yes.
Most
He told them where to go for it.
Lansky now embarked on his most ambitious project yet, the construction of the Riviera Hotel Casino on the Havana seafront.
We know from the evidence of the Riviera Hotel that by the mid-50s, he was worth $17, $18 million, which was a lot of money in those days. And he plowed it all into bricks and mortar and air conditioning and gold tiles and so on. It's a wonderful hotel by the standards of the 1950s. It's the first to have air conditioning. You go inside the casino, it's a wonderful mosaic tiled, egg-shaped room. Still, with all the glamour of a Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall film. And that's where he put his money.
It was the largest single investment Lansky ever made.
I think Meyer was focusing on Havana to clean up his fortune. That was going to be his Kennedy moment. Havana was legal.
But Lansky had bet wrong. The hours of New Year's Day, the country. The casinos were looted and then seized by the new government.
When Castro came out of the hills, Lansky lost his money, Pepsi-Cola lost their money, United Tobacco lost their money, General Motors lost their money. All the big American corporations lost the money that they had. So the world's cleverest gambler, at the end of the day, made a bad gamble.
Lansky now moved permanently to Miami. He was almost 60 and in poor health, but his return to America coincided with a renewed offensive against organized crime.
Attorney General Robert Kennedy paints a grim picture of the rise of lawlessness under the Cosa Nostra, or Mafia. This he describes as the government of organized gambling, narcotics peddling, extortion, racketeering, and controlling of certain trade unions.
With Bobby Kennedy at the Justice Department, the government had the Mafia in its sights. Lansky was still regarded as the mastermind of the mob and found himself under almost constant surveillance.
Meyer is being dogged 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by the authorities, by local authorities, by the FBI.
I knew them by heart. They were my buddies. If I saw them at the racetrack, I used to tell them, I'm going to report you to the FBI. You're not supposed to be gambling.
His wife, Teddy, one time was asked, did your husband have bodyguards? She said, yeah, the FBI. They were always there.
Listening bugs were placed in his house and at hotels he stayed in, but they yielded little. Spends much time lounging around his home, read this report from July the 7th, 1962. Main pursuits seem to be playing gin rummy with friends, watching TV, and reading.
All those wiretaps bugs that the FBI did in the 1960s, every single bug was successful in getting good stuff, good intelligence for the FBI, except Lansky's. Lansky's was a total zero.
The bugging did yield one conversation, which has gone down in mob folklore. It happened on the evening of May 27th, 1962. While subject and wife were watching television, the FBI report read, TV panelists referred to organized crime as being second only in size to the government itself. Lansky remarked to his wife that organized crime was bigger than US Steel. Lansky's exact words were not written down, and the tape was then reused, but the report was later leaked to the press. By the time the movie Godfather 2 was made in 1974, the scriptwriters had Hyman Roth, a character based on Lansky, narrowing his eyes and murmuring, "Michael, we're bigger than US Steel."
In fact, the record shows he did not say we are bigger than US Steel. And of course, since it's not recorded, we don't know in what tone he said it. Could he have been sardonic? Could he have been sarcastic and saying, it's bigger than US Steel? We don't know. But he himself would always say, when am I supposed to have said that? But of course, it stuck to him like a sort of catchphrase for the rest of his life, and of course, was finally immortalized on the silver screen.
In March 1970, police finally managed to arrest Lansky at Miami Airport on drugs charges.
The drug bust in 1970 I thought was a travesty and a joke, because basic charge was that he left the country to go to Mexico for a vacation, I believe, and had these drugs on him but without having a prescription for it.
The so-called drugs were in fact medicines for a stomach complaint.
I thought it was pure poppycock.
The case was thrown out, but Lansky had had enough. For 40 years he had sought respectability and acceptance as an American citizen. Now he turned his back on his adopted country. In July 1970, he moved to Israel and applied for citizenship.
All through his life, he has had this pride in his Jewish identity. He takes pride in the creation of the State of Israel, which puts into practice the toughness and the courage that he saw back in his youth in Grodno. And here's a whole country that embodies it.
Lansky is living in an exclusive resort hotel, the Acadia, north of Tel Aviv. He's not exactly in the market for publicity.
Lansky found himself pursued by the American media. But while in Israel, he granted Israeli TV a rare interview, presenting himself as a victim of persecution.
Mr. Lansky, if the accusations against you are false, why don't you go back to the United States and demand justice?
I think it would be terribly hard for one to get a fair trial, as much as I believe in the American courts.
Are you a religious Jew?
No, I'm not a religious Jew.
And what
But I'm a Jew in my heart.
I think that there was probably a sense that we're all mishpucha, we're all family. And of course they're going to let me in. There's a law, the law of return. What they didn't bank on was that it would be a political hot potato.
The Americans were still pursuing Lansky and were pressuring for his return. The case was referred to Israel's Prime Minister, Golda Meir.
She didn't know Meyer Lansky from hole in the wall. And somebody said he wants to be a citizen of Israel, and she said, fine, I don't see any problem with that. And then another one of her advisors said, you know, we understand he's in the Mafia. Golda Meir said, Mafia? Mafia? No Mafia.
Lansky's application for citizenship was denied, and he was expelled from Israel. Lansky's wife, Teddy, arrived back in America literally spitting with fury.
Now look, go away from me, I'll kill you!
Lansky himself was immediately arrested. The government had finally succeeded in putting together a case against him, a case that rested on the evidence of a low-level mobster turned police informant called Fat Vinny.
Fat Vinny was Vincent Teresa, who was a hoodlum from Massachusetts. He was, a thief and an extortionist, and he had been a federal witness in 38 Mafia trials that the Department of Justice had brought.
Are you pleased with the way your attorneys handled your defense?
I'm sorry, but no comment.
Well, you can't blame me for asking, can you?
No, I don't blame you at all.
Inside, the assistant prosecutor found a man very different from the one he had been expecting.
He was a gentleman, not a wise guy. It was clear that he'd read a lot. He was very articulate, very charming. If you didn't know any better, you'd think he was an executive of an American corporation.
The prosecution was led by a young Justice Department attorney called R.J. Campbell.
We felt that if he had to defend himself, we could really get after him, because I had a mountain of material to cross-examine him on. So I was ready, prepared long and hard for Lansky to take the stand. He did not take the stand. What he did was put his wife on the stand.
Teddy Lansky produced receipts from a hotel to show her husband had been in Boston at precisely the time Fat Vinny claimed to have been handing money to him in Miami.
So, we were hanging by our threads, right? Because once the witness has lied about one thing in his testimony, you are a gone goose.
It was a very thin case. We'd have been better off leaving Lansky in Israel.
Lansky was acquitted. The little man walked free. For some, it was further evidence of his fiendish brilliance. But for others, doubts were beginning to creep in that Lansky really was as rich and powerful as the government and the press claimed.
Let's put it this way, he lived very modestly. We never caught him spending much money on anything. He had nice suits. It doesn't cost that much to buy a suit. He just lived modestly.
Have a good weekend.
So, mastermind of the mob, or as Lansky himself claimed, a retired investor living on a modest pension. Only in 1983 would the truth be revealed. Lansky died in his bed of cancer. His family gathered for the reading of the will. They too were hoping it would reveal hidden riches. They were disappointed.
I do believe there was a moment of recognition that, boy, this reality is very different than we thought it would be. Because to my knowledge, nobody in that family has a lot of money, and it's not because they secretly do and have hidden it so cleverly. I don't buy it.
I spent a lot of time with his crippled son, Buddy, who, after his death, was living on state charity, something Meyer had always tried to avoid in his lifetime, but he couldn't leave enough money for his beloved crippled son to survive. I think it defies the rules of human behavior that they would go through such denial of comfort for the sake of proving what?
Meyer Lansky never was the all-powerful godfather some believed. And he lost the bulk of the fortune he had in Havana in 1959. Under constant surveillance by the government, from 1960 he was effectively retired. And he spent most of what he had left on his various legal battles.
How would you describe yourself? As a human being.
He saw himself as a victim of hypocrisy, even anti-Semitism. But Meyer Lansky never was quite the mastermind the American public believed. He shone only in comparison with other mobsters.
Most of these organized crime guys, they're not educated at all. So we're not operating from a very high plane. So a guy comes along like Lansky, who is quick and good with numbers, and he stands out. He's only bright in connection with the other people around him. He certainly wasn't in Bill Gates and Warren Buffett's league.
You know, the cold hard evidence of Meyer Lansky, the businessman, suggests that he wasn't quite the business brains that everybody thought he was, or that he thought he was himself.
But the American public is reluctant to abandon the myth.
The great irony is the proof you are a mastermind is that nobody can find any proof. Everybody was running around looking for banks and pawns in this vast game, and they couldn't find them. And then when they couldn't find them, they said, man, this guy's good. There is this belief, especially in America, in the mystical power of the mob. And so when Meyer Lansky would walk his dog, people would go, ah, he's just walking his dog. He's doing the whole walking his dog low-key ruse. No, he was walking his dog.